Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you everyone for coming. So, as the title suggests, we're going to be covering sort of the glorification of terrorism and the impact that AI has had on that. We're going to briefly sort of touch on the specific... Oh.
The mic isn't working.
That would be helpful. Hello again. As I was saying, thank you, Caroline. We're going to be briefly sort of attempting to cover this quite sort of contentious topic, very current topic. To do that, we're going to essentially try and address the unique challenges that AI brings with the glorification of terrorism, and also, hopefully, in equal part, try to understand that the innovative ways that AI can be used to combat this issue, such that it's not all doom and gloom. I'll quickly introduce myself, and then I'll let the panel introduce themselves, and then we can get started. So I'm Thomas. I'm from M&C Saatchi World Services, specifically Human Digital, which is a threat analytics department, researching all things terrorism and violent extremism, and we have a sort of threat analytics product which allows us to research all sorts of emerging technologies, specifically generative AI being one of them. I'll pass over to Arda and Julian to introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. My name is Arda Gerkens. I'm the president of the Dutch Authority on Online Terrorist Content and Child Sex Abuse Material. We are basically established on two legislations, one being the European Terrorist Content Online legislation, and we have national legislation to combat child sex abuse material.
So hi everyone. Thank you, Thomas. I'm Julian Belaish. I'm the research director of the Global Network on Extremism and Technology. We are a network of contributors from across the field of extremism studies based at ICSR in King's College London, and we are the academic arm of the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism.
Great, thank you both. So we'll start with a very broad question to hopefully kickstart the conversation. Essentially, I think firstly it's important to understand that the real challenges that AI brings in terms of the glorification of terrorist content and the unique affordances that brings to terrorist actors, but also in helping disseminate propaganda and videos and all sorts of content, not necessarily from terrorist organizations themselves, but supporters across social media. So it'd be useful just to touch on both your experience in terms of the role of AI in the glorification of content and the kind of challenges that brings.
So of course, at GNet and GFCT, we have seen firsthand how violent extremists use AI technology. Obviously, AI technology have the power to automatize processes. We've seen how AI can help increase the scale of violent extremist propaganda output, how it can help them to achieve their operational objectives and to sow confusion in the information environment. I think this is really critical to talk about the scale, how AI technology these AI-powered tools can basically flood the information environment with fake news, deep fake, with hyper-stylized pieces of content, and that's pretty much what's central right now.
Yes, well, for us it poses some difficulties looking at how we are going to send out our removal orders and how we are going to argument that that's illegal content. I'll give you some examples. For instance, I think we all know the Christchurch shooting, terrible shooting that happened in New Zealand. There's lots of videos still out there. And what we now see is lots of those videos being used with AI like a game. So it's like minions being shut down by another minion. So in that case, can you still speak of terrorist content, or is it legally something else? So it kind of tries to make the content less severe. So for us, it's going to be harder to be able to categorize it as such. And the other thing is, if you would change that content in that way, or what we also see, make it like the videos a diapositive or put other filters around it, it's very difficult for companies to detect that material. So they kind of dive under all these detection methods that they have. And the last thing that I see lately very much is the hybridization of several streams of kind of severe content being connected to each other, giving like these small symbols out there that you need to understand that's contributing to radicalization. And then sometimes even then is also hard to argument that it's illegal content. So in the end, we all need to make sure that once we send out a removal order on that content, it will hold up in court. But you know, once you need to start to explain a lot, then it's going to be more and more difficult. So for us, sometimes it is that we're not sending out removal orders on content that we know is contributing to radicalization, but we don't have enough legislation to send out a removal order on it.
It's a difficult balance to strike, Julian.
No, I just wanted to add on what Ada is saying, and it's true that like it puts on strain, it's put a big strain on AI detection models that companies use. One thing that's important, I think, to note is that tech companies have been using AI and machine learning for at least a decade. This is not something that tech companies are afraid of. Whether if it's content sharing and matching, strategic network disruption or logo detection. And AI can actually hyper-stylize some of this content, making it harder for the systems to identify. But not only that, it can also produce new types of content. We've seen in the UK in last summer songs being AI generating during the riot, or also chatbots coming up that can either give operational instructions, or bomb-making tutorials, but not only. Chatbots can also help radicalize and gather data that will ultimately make bespoke content towards the kind of people who will use them. So that's something I think is quite important to look at also. It's how evolutive that kind of technologies can be. We're talking about AI models and systems that have the ability to learn and to change over time. Recently, in a slightly different topic, there was a study that just came up that showed that a chatbot was able to talk people out of conspiratorial thinking and managed to get through rational arguments. They managed to get promising results. I don't want to enter the methodological aspects of it, as we can always discuss this, but apparently the results were that they managed to get a 20% reduction. So imagine if that kind of technology would be used to do the exact opposite. So I think this is something to bear in mind when we talk about AI, is the highly evolutive nature of the systems we're talking about.
If I may add, because I think it's very interesting that you mentioned these chatbots. I just came at the other session. We saw some examples of how these chatbots can help perpetrators to sexually abuse children, or to indeed make bombs, or even to get extreme theories out there. And I think we should not underestimate the power of these bots, because the young people are really using them a lot. Like Google is nothing anymore. It's all ChatGPT. And there's so many different chatbots out there who have less good moderation. Not saying that ChatGPT already has good moderation, but even less, let's say it that way. So I really worry about that and the impact that it's going to have on our youth, certainly in terms of radicalization.
Absolutely, and I would also note, I'm not sure if people are hearing me, if I'm talking properly into the microphone, but one of our contributors also found a chatbot that was basically an impersonation of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. So the user could have the experience of chatting with Ted Kaczynski and getting its exact recipe in terms of how he was making his bombs, etc. So that's the kind of... There was another issue on a new platform that I'm not going to give names, but that basically, as a service, have chatbots that allows you to talk to fictional characters. And many users build chatbots in which they allow you to communicate with fake mass shooters, as if you're talking with the Columbine shooters or with Brenton Tarrant himself. So that's the kind of things that tech companies, when they build the technology, they don't necessarily realize until it happens that it can be used differently.
I think that's an interesting point to touch on. I was just wondering, going back to your previous point about the sort of hybrid threat, how much the sort of use of these AI tools, specifically AI chatbots, should be seen as a sort of child safety issue compared to a sort of real systematized sort of operational international security issue in terms of the sort of functional use of AI tools by genuine terrorist groups or encouraging actors. And interested to hear your thoughts on whether analyzing an AI tool through the lens of a sort of child safety and experience would be kind of different to that of a sort of terrorist and glorification of terrorism threat.
Oh, yes and no, I think. Legally, it still is, and maybe that's the challenge there, because we see now that it's getting more and more hybrid. So not only at the chatbots, but we see now that in right-wing extremist groups, children are being extorted, most of the time sextorted, and then being drawn into that group. They are being invited or pressured, actually, to mutilate themselves or to torture their cats or even kill their cats or even do worse things. So here you can see that this child sex abuse material, or at least the shame that comes with it, is being used to pressure kids to go into these, perform these awful acts. So here you can see that both topics are connected to each other. But now we're talking about the worst of the worst, but I want to give another example which I saw lately. If you look at all these misogyny going on, the Andrew Tate communities that are arising. We lately saw an image of Brenton Tarrant with a naked torso, like, lots of muscles and everything. So that's basically glorifying him in a certain way and attracting people from other groups to look into these kind of actors of attacks, which worries me a lot, because you can see it's clearly not content that we can send out removal orders on, but it's very much content that radicalizes or at least pulls these kids into the community. I think it's just 2 days ago or something, there was this great article in The Guardian saying that now in Sweden they see the rise of the right extremist groups attracting to kids as young as 10-year-olds. So, there's a lot of things going on there, and we're just trying to get a grasp of it. I don't know about you, Julian.
I think there are many interesting points in what you just said. And first of all, I think it's important to highlight the role the internet play and social media play in making ideological boundaries more porous. People are drawn to violent extremism for a variety of drivers and reasons, and you can't be sure about who is in a given community and chat group. People will push forward their narratives, and ultimately you will find overcrossing of all sorts of ideological content, and that has an impact. And I think another point that's interesting, we're talking more and more about the COM network and 762. Groups are emerging online that are at the intersection between extortion, violent extremism, a strong influence of the Order of Nine Angle, and some rather chaotic ideologies. And I think that it's not incompatible to approach the glorification of terrorism with the same rigor as we do with the child safety issue. I think that both requires heavy attention, strong definitional debates to know how to identify what type of content corresponds to what, and inform policies ultimately for regulators to be able also to act and work together with tech companies to get this thing out of that space, basically.
And here, in my opinion, it doesn't help that, we all talk about child sex abuse material, but we hardly talk about terrorist content and the effect it has on our youth and our societies. And certainly the hybrid situation that we're having now increasing that more and more. And I really do believe we should talk more about it, so people know, so people are informed that there is a threat out there, and indeed it's not directly leading to any attack. I mean, it's very hard. It's like the same thing with alcohol. If you drink milk, start drinking milk, you won't be an alcoholic, right? Everybody drinks milk, but I think every alcoholic once started drinking milk, or something like that, you know. So it's very hard to say this is a direct consequence of this type of content. But we do know, and many research shows, that it is building up to a certain point that it might lead to a lone wolf attack or even worse. If you look at jihadistic content, it's quite clear. I mean, just showing you use a truck, drive into people, or use a nail gun. I mean, they're very explicit about it, right? So it's very much easier to point out that this is content that needs to be taken offline. But we really need to talk about what's going on with our youth and how they're being influenced with the AI bots as well as this type of content.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've sort of touched on kind of AI for good earlier on. We've also now touched on the sort of hybrid threat. Looking to sort of the positive use of AI in terms of moderation, and also looking at sort of the definitional issues and importance of understanding correct taxonomies, etc., in order to make AI models and moderation as effective as possible. Be interested to hear your thoughts, both of your areas of work, on how sort of important that process is and what sort of positive impact that can have on moderation.
I mean, I can see many use AI as I said, first of all, and I want to make that very clear, tech companies have been using AI for a long time and machine learning capabilities. They've been able to automatically identify people who were already banned and returnees, or strategic network disruption, identifying sets of relations between different actors and going for comprehensive takedown of these networks. Now, obviously, new models step in. A lot of things can be done, I think, especially in the field of translation, because most of the resources directed to the West, English-speaking content. Obviously, you can find other tools that focuses on other European languages, etc. But ultimately, I think a lot of the violent extremist content that goes online goes amiss because tech trust and safety teams don't have people who speak those languages, and AI can eventually help automatizing translation to high enough standards if we work right on the technology and if it evolves, maybe not at this stage, but we're getting closer to that. I know that one of our GNet fellows is working on his PhD on an algorithm leveraging the capabilities of natural language processing to identify content in Portuguese language. I had a discussion with another contributor who is from Korea and told me that a lot of the content, let's say in masculine spheres, remain in place because there are not enough people in big tech companies speaking Korean. So this is where I think AI can help, also in terms of detection, how to surface, but this is a work that has been started by tech companies over a decade ago. And I hope it will keep moving forward and become more and more efficient. But again, there's no surfacing content without proper definition and taxonomy, and I think Ada and I had a little discussion right now in the corridor about this, about the importance of identifying that type of content correctly. When you see Al-Qaeda branded content, you know what this is about, but when you see someone promoting great replacement theories and one that inspires violent action, what do you do? How do you characterize that threat? So that's...
It's a very good example because Al-Qaeda content doesn't have to be content that is illegal under the terrorist content online regulation. For instance, somebody saying, "Hey, I've become a father, and this is my child," and it has an Al-Qaeda logo. It's not content that needs to be taken down. So it's not per se content that's illegal or falls under the terrorist content online regulation. So indeed, what we have this regulation now in Europe, and we speak to other authorities regularly, and we find that we actually not always agree on the removal orders being sent out, or we do it differently. And so our organization started the initiative to draft a taxonomy in Europe on base of the legislation, to make sure that we in Europe have some base on which we all have or act in the same way. There's already a taxonomy, some kind of taxonomy out there. GiveCT uses them, Tech Against Terrorism uses them. We've tried to see if that's useful for us, but we really need something that's based on the legislation that we have. And so once we have it, that's something that we can give to platforms and say, you know, listen, if you find this type of content, you can be sure that if we find it, you will have a removal order, so you can remove it yourself, just, you know, to prevent the dissemination anyway. And I think what you're mentioning, all the AI tooling out there, and I hope that AI will be used to also detect this material and prevent it being disseminated. Because I truly believe, as a regulator, we are not here to see if we can send out as many removal orders as we can. Actually, my goal is to not be able to send out the removal orders because I simply cannot find this kind of material. And so that's not to be done by taking it down. That's to be done to preventing it being uploaded. And the only way to do so, because we're not there to find perpetrators or something that's whatever police or intelligence services do, we're here really to focus on the content. The only way to do that is to cooperate with the platforms, with tech companies, to find tooling, to prevent this material being disseminated. We need to work together to do so. We can't do this on our own.
Absolutely, and I would say this is exactly GFCT's approach, having GNet as an academic kind of arm, working on the definitional content and bringing contributors to identify new trends, new discursive trends, new tactics to evade and circumvent content moderation, but also GFCT working hand in hand with tech companies. GFCT also has working groups every year. GFCT brings together researchers and practitioners to work on specific issues. This year, AI will be at the center of GFCT preoccupation. A new working group coming up will be working on basically establishing best practices and standards for AI safety products. And I think that's the kind of thing that can help then working better with policymakers and regulators.
Great, thank you. That was super interesting to sort of, first outline, paint the picture of some of the challenges and the threats that AI brings, but also that, with that rate of innovation from the adversaries, we've also got equal measures as trust and safety professionals to kind of mitigate that. And hopefully working together, signal sharing and creating taxonomies that are universal, we can kind of help to kind of always stay on top of that technological advancement and curve. I'm just conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll open the floor to any questions we have, and then I'll let you get off for some lunch.
Too hungry.
Hello, I have a question that might be a little far from the subject. How complex is it for you now to try and create these kind of taxonomies when we're faced with a political situation where abroad the perception of news and information is being redefined, in the sense that now, for example, you're allowed from the US to say that LGBTQ issues are a mental illness. How do you work with these differing definitions of what is harmful and what's acceptable online and the impact on radicalization?
Well, let's be clear, we have European legislation. So it's our framework and we need to work with that. The only thing is within that legislation is the glorification of terrorism, and glorification is a broad item. What's glorification? So we need to define that more, and I think there's enough legislation or examples out there in which we can. There is a challenge, though. The challenge is that if you look at the legislation, basically all companies that have services directed to Europe need to have a representative in Europe and need to comply with the legislation. And what we see is there are some platforms who do not have a representative in Europe and don't feel that they're part of the legislation, even though sometimes they have like Dutch-speaking channels, of which you can certainly say they're directed to the Dutch people. they would say, no, we're an American company, we don't need to comply with the terrorist content online regulation because we're looking at the Fourth Amendment, freedom of speech. The legislation is very new. We're still a toddler, that's how I look at it. But I do think that's something that is going to be very challenging in the coming years. Certainly seeing that the bigger platforms already are moving away for some kind of content moderation. And they're trying to kind of walk the line here. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that evolves. And therefore, I think it's really important that we really start to strengthen collaboration between tech companies and also within the countries, within Europe themselves, because only in that way we can make a fist against that.
I think, so my situation is a bit different. We're university-based structures, so we work on those issues independently from political context whatsoever. We have our methodology to approach these things, and when we discuss definitional debate, we encode that into other considerations.
Well, in that case, I'll thank you, panelists Ada and Julian, and thank you all for coming, and let you all go for lunch. Thank you.